Susanne is teaching and lecturing regularly. She's also a member of several juries and committees such as the Scientific Committee to the Brussels Capital Region in New Housing Policies, post-COVID. And in 2016, she received the Young Planners Award for Housing and Sustainable Habitat. We're very interested, Susanne, to hear your thoughts on living cities.
Thank you, Iris, and hello, everyone. And thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here with you today. I will try to make a very brief, I'm just checking if I can move on in the, yes, okay. I will try to make a very brief introduction in relationship to this year's European subject, which is living cities. Now, see if I can, I'm trying to control the screen here. Ah, yes, it's working. Okay. So the city as we know it has always been the place where we live together. For all the various reasons, of course, that make us come together as people. I mean, security, opportunity, desire, economy, and living together within a certain environment requires a system of social organization that always takes a physical form. Whether we speak about a metropolitan city center or the small village or the suburban expansion. And as an architect and an urban planner, I am personally very interested in this connection between the social on the one hand and the physical world on the other, and how the physical structures of the city can support and enhance, let's say, our social organization, or what we would like as social organizations. When working on a daily basis with collectivities, towns, cities, etc., I mean, in a kind of simplifying way, the most common ways of dealing with urban problems today are one of these two ways. On the one hand, there is, let's say, a top-down approach, the philosophy of let's say, the great urban master plan, which is very much present today still. And on the other hand, the emergence, or maybe the re-emergence, let's say, of a bottom-up approach with quite incredible rise, I would say, in the last couple of years that we have seen in France of participatory processes of companies that work entirely on collective and public design methods. Now, when dealing with questions such as metabolistic vitalities and inclusive vitalities that are the subject of this year's European, I think it demands to do both of these approaches, but in a much more interconnected ways, and to put the focus on both the process and the result. And I would have to say, I think it's not a simple subject at all. It's a very challenging one. And to me, it relates, and it's about making this connection between the social and the physical reality of the city. I'm trying to move on with the slides, but it's a bit, it works. I will do it with my keyboard instead. So to address this, I just wanted to read this quote by late landscape architect and environmentalist Ian McHarg, who said that one can say that there is a requirement for any system, whether it is subcellular, cell, tissue, organism, individual, family, institution, to find the most fit of all environments and to adapt both that environment and the system itself. The environment and the system must fit. Now, in terms of cities and relating to this quote, which is quite important to me in my comprehension of the city, we can look in a way at the system being the social organization that we sustain on a daily basis as a collective, and the environment as the physical condition in which we live. And in order for these to fit, they must continually influence each other. And in essence, it's a relationship and it's a question of connection. And this all very much relates to space. Now, one of the subjects that we work on at the office quite a lot is urban renewal of modernist housing districts. There's quite a lot of them in France, quite a lot of work to do on this. And these are places where, for us, this relationship between the social and the physical becomes very important. Now, generally, when these areas were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, of course, they offered a real qualitative leap for people who came and who moved in there with better housing, larger new amenities, etc. But they also had the ambition at the time, a lot of the time, which we notice when we go back and we look at the history of these projects, they had the ambition to produce coherent urban environments. And though many of them have failed in time, for various reasons. I mean, it can be poor planning or failure to go all the way in the planning process, or of course, economic and social segregation. The fact is that when we go back and we look at them, and on the examples that we have worked on, there was always at the start a clear urban concept that aimed to connect each individual person and their housing unit to a larger environment. And there was, in most of these projects, when we look at them, an ambition to see the city not only as a sum of individuals, but also as a collective entity, as a social organization that has a specific impact on its environment. Now, to try to explicit this a little bit more clearly, I wanted to briefly talk to you about one ongoing project that we have at the office that we're currently working on, and it's called Cité Claveau, and it is located in Bordeaux, in the city of Bordeaux. And it's a project where, in essence, we tried, I would say, to regenerate a neighborhood using the inherent social and physical forces of the district. Now, Cité Claveau is a housing district that was built in the 1950s. It was on an old German military camp in order to provide housing for central slum residents who were living in the center of Bordeaux in very dilapidating housing. And as you can see here, so it's the district that is outlined in red. As you can already see, I think on this aerial view, is that it sort of the spatial aspect of this neighborhood is quite different from what happens around it. There are about 450 dwellings in this district, and the majority of these units are these small individual houses that you can see on this photo. In 2015, the public housing authority that is called Aquitanis, and that owns the buildings and the land, commissioned GRAU to work on the urban renewal of the site and to work on the renovation of this area. Now, Claveau initially was built on the principles of the garden city. Every house in the district had their own small vegetable garden, and there was a lot of common spaces that were organized, green spaces, collective gardens, collective playgrounds, etc. But it was also designed very much as an isolated project, because the whole plan of the neighborhood was built on a 28-degree tilted grid that in essence disconnects the area from the rest of northern Bordeaux. So as you can see, the grid of Claveau is the red tilted one, and the rest of the city all around it is rather on this green urban structure. And this disconnection of the grid creates a kind of very particular condition where the house appears almost as standing very lonely, because you have very large spaces in front of the house before you get to the street, and very large spaces in the back. And in time, these spaces that were initially planned to accommodate different uses, to be green spaces, they were, of course, expensive to maintain. And so in time, this sort of disconnection between the house and the street system led to large parts of the district becoming unused void space. On the plan that you can see here of Claveau initially in 2015, you have all the gray areas which is completely unused today, and which is quite degrading in terms of quality of public space. Altogether, on the 17 hectares that the neighborhood is, it represents 6 hectares So about 6 football fields of spaces which are completely unused and that are degrading quite fast. So with this in mind, and this situation and this very specific neighborhood, and the Garden City being in essence a collective project, we started out by trying to see how we could work on reconnecting the house and the city, and trying in a way to reactivate the urban and the collective system that was one thought. So you can see on the bottom left, there is a photo of, let's say, quite a representative outside space of Claveau, and on the right side, you can see a little bit of a plan extract, which starts to outline not each an individual house in itself, but rather how together they start to form a system. Now, this whole project started in 2015, and it's a co-construction process, which means that the inhabitants of the neighborhood are involved in every step of the project. So one of the first things that we did, this was in the beginning of 2016, is that we organized a week in Claveau, where we discussed with the people, with the residents, all the problems and the potentials of the neighborhood. We did a series of in situ workshops where we were directly proposing different kind of spatial interventions in relationship to the different needs that were expressed. So for example, and just to give a few, one day we worked, for example, on the forefront of the house, on this empty space between the street and the house, testing different ways of how the space could be occupied. Another day we tested out which were the pathways that were important for the inhabitants, and the garden access was one of the main aspects that was retained from this work. We also discussed new collective spaces, the potential of creating real new collective spaces within the neighborhood, but also the kind of frame that you should have, because again, the problem is Claveau is not is the abundance of space, that there is in essence too much space. And all this work, 1 week being in Claveau and doing this work with inhabitants, led to this very colorful plan, which is not a master plan in itself, but what we call the plan of the Claveau system, with a series of different ingredients that have all been approved by the inhabitants to reinvest and productively use the collective ground of the neighborhoods. And I would say that these ingredients are the minimal spatial structures that will, in a way, guarantee a reconnection between the house and each private resident in Claveau and the district as a collective environment. Now, as I said, the project started in 2015. We are now in 2021, and we are very, very, very far from being done. The houses have been renovated by an architectural office, but all the transformation on the urban space is moving at a very slow pace, because every single action that is being undertaken in Claveau is first tested with the inhabitants before implementation. So I will just show you a few examples of what is being done. One of the first things that we did, for example, was to build a tree nursery within the center of the neighborhood. Here you see pictures on the left of the younger people of the neighborhood who started to outline this tree nursery. It's been now 4 years that this nursery exists, and the trees that we planted now serve to plant different garden extensions within Claveau and new public spaces. And the tree nursery has been renewed 3 times so far, and it's really become one of the central points of the neighborhood as a public space in itself. And so at the same time that we tested, that we built this tree nursery, we also tested different ways of planting with the inhabitants. And we are now starting to deploy a planting strategy on the public spaces, where we are bringing in soil that we are putting directly on the existing ground, and using plants from the tree nursery to regrow and to replant the public spaces. We are creating these new pathways through the blocks. So now with what we tested with the people, we are now ensuring that they all have a dry double access to their houses, both to the front of the house and then directly to their garden. We are building thresholds in front of the houses and working also with the residents on building furniture to occupy these different spaces in accordance to each and everyone's need. There are large empty voids within the neighborhood, which have been identified to densify the neighborhood and to offer smaller housing for elderly people who live in the neighborhood, in the houses, which are 2 stories, but who would need to move out and to live in a smaller apartment. And so instead of moving out of the neighborhood, we are adding smaller units into it. This is the first example by Bordelais architect Fabre de Marien. It was just inaugurated in March. And what is interesting is that all the new housing that we add, it's about 70 in total, they all have the same qualities as the existing one. So they all have their each small garden and at the threshold that you can see here on the front. We are also building certain public spaces, and we are currently now working on how we can create also new kind of collective spaces together. I think that all of these examples, which are just a few of what is happening, demonstrate, at least to me, how although it's mostly a process, the project in itself, and that everything is specific, every condition is specific, there is also a system within it all. And the system is the collective organization of about 1,000 people living together here in this specific urban environment. So I will finish off the keynote presentation with the book recommendation, because I like books. I like to change a little bit in the end. This is a book that has been quite a while on my book recommendation list. And it's a book that is called Weather by Jenny Offill. It's a fiction. I think it's a great book just to read for pleasure, but also because I think it transcribes quite well how we all can be quite lost and overwhelmed with the scope of the problems that we have. And this is very much true as urban planner. And I think that metabolistic vitalities, inclusive vitalities, those are, I think, great ambitions, but they are also very large and somewhat conceptual. And I think what I wanted to illustrate also with the project of Claveau, I would say, is the relevance, at least for me, also to really focus on what's there and on breaking systems down into smaller pieces, that it helps and that it doesn't stop us from having a holistic approach at the same time, that this sort of ingredient approach that we are having in Claveau, it means that we have a system, we have a collective system, but it also means that we can go and talk to each individual in the neighborhood about one specific issue. And so this breaking down complex issues into smaller pieces, I think, is an interesting way, at least for us as the office, to move along with these very, very difficult questions that we have to deal with. So thank you very much.
Susanne, thank you very much for this highly interesting talk and this project. You touched upon really a lot of topics, and somehow we will see later, but we have one site which has some similarities. So I think it was very interesting to hear your talk here.